Before I try to retell this harrowing tale, know that before it happened, my family and I would take yearly trips to log cabins in the Austrian Alps. Before, they were perfect. Now, well, you'll see. Just under 2 years ago, myself, my wife, and my 6-year-old daughter Lucy were on our way up one of these wild mountains, encumbered by a heavy load of presents stuffed in the boot, ready for Christmas. It was 2 days before Christmas Day, and we were looking forward to a cozy log cabin situated just a couple more minutes up the road, with a few others dotted around elsewhere relatively nearby, but not close enough for interaction. Once we had arrived, we began unloading the car, telling Lucy to go and explore the cabin, mostly to sneak in the presents without her knowing. As we took out the last present, I noticed something move in the corner of my eye, somewhere along the tree line a couple yards out, that made me swivel my head to glance over.
"What's wrong, honey?"
My wife asked. I turned to face her and to give her a quick smile to tell her everything was okay. I had an uneasy feeling, but it didn't seem uncommon enough for me to worry about. We went inside shortly after. The next day, there was a blizzard warning for that same evening, Christmas Eve. We discussed leaving, but the weather forecast stated it would be cleared 3 days after the initial storm. There were no refunds, so we were going to take our chances. Hours later, the blizzard was in full swing. Outside the windows was a raging storm of pure white. The howling noise of the blizzard was deafening, until it was abruptly broken by the sound of glass shattering in one of the rooms.
"What was that?"
Lucy jumped up and screamed. "Lucy, stay here with Mommy." I nodded to my wife as she beckoned for Lucy to come over for a hug. Swiftly after, I raced off towards the source of the noise. Down the corridor on the left, there was a much louder howling noise, and gusts of snow were bursting out into the corridor. I quickly poked my head around the corner, suddenly witnessing a smashed window and a flood of snow gushing through the debris of the window. Immediately, I checked around the room for some kind of entry device, like a rock or perhaps something man-made. After a quick search, I failed to find a rock anywhere in the room or any other kind of entry device. There was also furniture in the room, so to be safe, I double-checked each one, still resulting in nothing.
Get way more than you pay for when you work out at Pure Gym. With no...
There was also furniture in the room, so to be safe, I double-checked each one, still resulting in nothing. I told my wife about what had happened, and we agreed that the best thing we could do was to shut the door to the room as an attempt to conserve heat and avoid any more snow making its way into our cabin. We went to bed that night quite unsettled by the ordeal. Eventually, though, we made it to sleep, with the wail of the storm roaring outside. In the morning, we woke up to silence. No howling wind, we thought. No Lucy, we realized. Every Christmas morning for 4 years in a row, Lucy had come stampeding in, jumping in her bed and dragging the two of us out of bed to go open presents. But why not this morning? We wondered, alarmed. We sprung out of bed and hurriedly made our way to her room. But on our way, we saw the door to the room with the broken window was now open. Panic was beginning to set in, making my wife and I dash to Lucy, flinging the door open to an empty bed. Both our faces went white with dread as we bolted back down the corridor to the broken window room. Upon entry, the two of us screamed in horror whilst remaining frozen in confused panic. We stared at a tunnel leading out from the smashed window through the thick snow. There was also a bit of torn clothing left on a fragment of glass. For a moment, we were too astounded and terrified to do anything, until we heard the sound of Lucy's voice ringing out from the tunnel. Instantly, I threw myself into the tunnel, crawling through with gritted determination. "Don't worry, Lucy, Daddy's coming!" I shouted down the tunnel. In no more than a 10-second sprint, I could make out Lucy's shadow in the darkness. She was squirming around frantically, and around what looked like her neck was an arm, squeezing against it tightly. I grabbed her by the leg, pulling her away. Suddenly, light flooded into the tunnel as the snow fell in from above. It was daytime. Now before me, hunched over like a devil, was a man. His skin had crusted over with dirt, his back still turned. I tucked Lucy behind me as I lunged at him. He still wasn't fixing me, even as I clutched his leg, ready to beat him to death. But as my hand finished closing around his ankle, A heavy boot hit me in the face, knocking me backwards as I reeled in agony. As I regained focus, I glared with hatred as the man turned to me and grinned, showing a set of roughly sharpened and decaying teeth before leaping out of the tunnel. I tried to follow him, but as I poked my head out of the tunnel, I saw he was practically at the tree line already. Hey! Get back here! Get back here! Get back here, you freak! I screamed at him, only to stop and stare with a mixed feeling of terror and murderous intent as he stopped, turned, and cocked his head to the side. Then, he grinned again. This time, he pointed at me, and then to the woods. He then turned and fled off into the thick foliage of snow and dark green behind him. He was gone. I returned back to help Lucy out of the tunnel and into the open arms of her mother. She had several bruises on her head and one rim of purple that was turning black around her neck. She was weak from the struggle, and soon she had passed out once more. We arrived at a hospital several hours later. Now, after 2 years, a police report had finally come out responding to the matter. In the police report was the following. April 6, 2005. A man was seen coming in and out of a nearby woodland by some locals around Christmas time. In the areas he was sighted, namely that of holiday cabins, there were cases reported of missing children. Following a police investigation, the man was found, along with the children. All were located in a makeshift wooden den, deep into the forest. The children were identified through analysis of their bones and any bits of flesh that still remained on the bones. However, most were either charred or rotten. The man in question has been given life for cannibalism, kidnapping, and murder. Our thoughts are with those that have been subjected to this tragedy. As my wife and I read the report, we cried. The tears were both horror and gratitude as we watched Lucy dash around the house, laughing and giggling, brimming with vitality. She escaped, but just barely.
My teeth chattered together loudly as I stood on top of the mountain, bare hands raised towards the sky. Yes, there's a signal! I could have cried, but my tears had long run out. With shaky hands, I pressed a few buttons on my phone, jumping upwards slightly as the familiar beep played again and again. No, what the? I was lost, confused, and angry. Why wasn't it working when it looked fine? Just an hour ago, I couldn't have cared less if my phone misbehaved. Skiing has always been a huge part of my life, and I was so happy to finally have a free weekend to just have fun with my friends in the mountains. John and Tia had a cabin near one of the lesser-known paths, so we often holed up there on long winter nights, toasting marshmallows on the open fire and just hanging out. We will never be able to do that again, not with... I shook my head. I've always talked to myself out loud when I was stressed, but this wasn't safe. Not with him caught on my track. I could hear him searching for me still. His voice was warm, a near welcome distraction from the icy wind.
Come on, sweetheart. You know that I know exactly where you are. Wouldn't it be easier for you to just come down here? Struggling doesn't look good on you.
Just an hour ago, I didn't even know that he existed. I mean, sure, I've heard of dangerous people lurking in the mountains before, especially after dark, but I'd never encountered anything worse than a spooked moose or a lost tourist who was desperate to find their way back to the official trails. I didn't want to think about what happened in the past 60 minutes. My shaking hands, clad in gloves, were soaked red. I tried to save Sandra, I really did. But if I'd stayed with her, he'd have found me faster. The sound of a snapping twig broke me out of my thoughts. It wasn't him. I felt lucky somehow, though it was a small wolf that stared me in the eyes. Where there are cubs, there's also adults. However, who knew with him around? He seemed to be quite fond of hunting. After all, a shaky breath was drawn from my lungs again as I tried to keep an ear out for him. Based on his humming, he was still quite a bit away. Jordan had tried to outrun him.
I'll be fine, guys. Just give me a few minutes and I'll end this nightmare. Don't worry.
That was the last thing I heard him say. How ironic, right? But I still had so much hope in him. I mean, he was the only one who could become a hero out of all of us. Jordan's always been good at every single sport he's tried. Scarily good, really. He had a good head start, too, shouting at us that he'd get help, that he'd save us. He followed Jordan like a stalking beast did with its prey. Jokingly, he mused if Jordan could outrun bullets. He couldn't. It took us a few minutes to realize, though. I remember cheering, feeling like we were saved. There was no way Jordan wouldn't get away, right? And yet he didn't. He knew the mountains like the back of his hands, but that wasn't enough. None of us were enough. We tried to plead with him. We tried to threaten him. None of that worked. I managed to slip away, though now I wonder if he'd meant to let me go. It's clear that he does like a chase, but there has to be a way for me to win. I just don't know what to do. I can't call home, and I certainly can't run any further. I'm so tired. But I really don't want to give up. Still, there has to be a way, right? It's funny because a bit more than an hour ago, I'd never thought I would be up here on my own. I was back in the cabin with the others, laughing at the stupid jokes Jordan liked to crack. I remember I was all cozied up by the fire, flipping through some old books we'd brought to the cabin. It was tradition to pretend that we would have a bunch of downtime. My thoughts were interrupted by another crack.
Look at you. You're even standing still for me.
This time, it was him. When he first knocked on the door, we didn't think anything weird of him. After all, he looked like a pretty chill guy wearing a red coat and some dark boots. He looked unassuming, though perhaps a little unkempt. Messy hair didn't really matter in the mountains. He must have kept an eye on us for a while by then. He just knew how to earn our trust.
Sorry, guys. I just want a cup of hot cocoa and a minute of rest. After that, I'll get going.
Thinking about it later, he'd never made requests, just demands. He sounded confident, though perhaps a bit eccentric, but not to the point where we found him to be suspicious. But then, he got Claire to help him check out his gear, out of earshot in the forest. Why we let her go with him on her own, I still don't know, but all I understood was that she never returned. I wondered if I was somehow numb now. Fear still clear in my heart. I could barely stop my entire body from shaking violently. I'd never felt so sick before. But as I stared straight into his eyes, I didn't really struggle. Why us? I mustered to ask, finally. The adrenaline that had kept me going only a minute prior was slowly subsiding, causing me to feel numb. He didn't reply for a short while, but I could almost hear him ramble about hatred or revenge or of the sort. Something that could justify what he'd done. Anything that could explain why us and not someone else. He shrugged. That's the last thing I heard before a loud, deafening bang.
You were in the right place at the right time.
And then, it all went black.
Have you ever been caught in a snowstorm? No one can get in touch with you. You don't know when the storm will stop or if someone will come to your rescue. Sounds like a horrible experience, doesn't it? Now, imagine that not only are you in that situation, but there is someone out there. Someone who not only can handle the snow, but is more comfortable with it. Someone who you know if he catches you, no one could ever save you from him. Like all stories, this one doesn't start off badly. I was on a winter vacation with my family. We were going to the family cabin for the weekend. Against all odds, it was snowing that day, but not hard enough to be a problem. I arrived with my wife and 2 children at the cabin and settled in. To our surprise, the snow was getting worse, but we were safe inside the cabin. We were sitting around drinking hot chocolate after dinner. To my surprise, my cell phone rang. I had been without signal for the last few hours, so those moments of signal surprised me and updated my phone with a bunch of notifications. I looked at them out of curiosity, and I must admit that my chocolate almost fell out of my hands. The notifications were from my father. He was telling me that he was feeling very bad. Then I received several messages from my mother saying that she had to call the ambulance and that my father had been hospitalized. At that moment, I didn't even hesitate. I had to go to the hospital and check on him. My wife told me that she and my kids would come with me, but even though the snowfall had calmed down a bit, it still seemed too unsafe to expose them to it. In a snowfall, the road is treacherous, and no matter how concentrated I was, there could always be accidents.
Are you sure you'll be all right? I don't want you to be alone, especially if something happens to your father.
Don't worry, honey. My mother already told me he's out of danger, but I'd still like to keep him company. Don't worry, I'll be back when the kids wake up.
If it gets serious with your father, promise to come and get us, okay? It's just a silly vacation. We can come back anytime.
I promise. Seriously, don't worry about me. And I'm sorry for leaving you alone with the kids. With that said, I got into the van and started my trip to the hospital. I had a few miles to go, but even though it was snowing, it was still a smooth ride. At first, I didn't have any problems. I'm a truck driver. Believe me, I've been on worse roads than this. But as the minutes passed, the snow started to get heavier. The falling snow covered part of my window, and even though the wipers cleaned it, the glass was automatically covered with snow again. Concentrating on watching the road, I kept an eye out for everything ahead. But to my surprise, I saw something else. A very large being with white hair crossed the road at an enormous speed. Was it a snow-covered animal? Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. There was no way any animal could be traveling that fast while freezing. I admit that I lost my concentration for a few seconds trying to figure out what I had seen, and those seconds cost me dearly. No! Oh my god. What was that? Of course there's no signal. From 1 second to the next, everything had become chaos. I was trapped on the side of the road with the car stuck in the middle of a snowfall that was getting more and more intense. And to top it off, no cell phone. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I felt a roar in the distance. Something was coming from far away, screaming wildly towards where I was. I couldn't see anything. All the windows were covered in ice. Suddenly, something very strong hit the car from the front. The glass didn't shatter by a miracle, but the car went back a few centimeters. What could be so strong as to move a car like that? Had another car hit me? Or was there something alive attacking me? As if in answer to my question, something leaped onto the roof of my vehicle, plunging it and almost driving a broken metal into my head. Something was on top of me. Whatever it was hitting the roof of the van, driving it deeper and deeper. I could feel a huge, violent roar from outside. My only reaction was to stay under the back seat in the fetal position, frozen with fear and crying. After a few seconds, the pounding stopped. Was it all over? I turned around and tried to start the car one more time. Maybe the push that beast had given me brought me out of the snow. As soon as I started the engine, the windshield wipers worked again and defrosted the front glass. It was a monster. There was some kind of snow gorilla on the front window. The giant beast violently hit the glass of my car over and over again. I put the van in reverse. It was still stuck, but now at least it was moving slowly. As I got out of the snow, I watched as the glass of the van began to crack as the beast hit it harder and harder. Once I made it back to the road, the glass exploded into pieces, and a huge hand grabbed my hand and threw me out of the van. My first reaction was to get up and crawl under the van before the beast had time to catch me. The beast didn't like this, and it went crazy and started hitting my van harder, trying to flip the van. I crawled out the other side of the van and climbed through the broken front window. By the time the beast noticed me and tried to catch me, it was too late. I started the vehicle and stepped on the gas pedal as fast as I could. The huge animal held onto the back of the van for a few seconds, but unable to keep up, it let go and chased me on foot for a few meters before giving up and looking at me as I drove away. After all that happened, my van was in the direction of the cabin, so I went back to it and hid with my family. My children were sleeping, but my wife was awake